Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about ratios and proportions. Now this is a topic that you've already covered in a previous math class, but we need to go ahead and revisit it and make sure that you understand how to work with ratios and proportions before we go on to any of our other units. We're especially going to need this topic when we talk about similar triangles. So let's go ahead and look at a few notes. The first thing is, well, what is a ratio? Well, if you remember, a ratio is just a comparison of two or more quantities. And there are a couple of different ways to represent a ratio. The first one is just a fraction. So I could have some number over another number. That would be a ratio. Another way that we can represent that is we could say A to B. That would be like 1 to 2 or 3 to 9, etc. Another way that you can shorten that is to write A colon B, and that's also a ratio. And just like fractions can be simplified, ratios can also be simplified. All right, so let's take it take a look at a couple of examples. So in example 1, it says that a music store has 40 trumpets, 39 clarinets, 24 violins, 51 flutes, and 16 trombones in stock. Give each as a simplified ratio. So in the first example, number 1, they want to know the ratio of trumpets to violins. So there are 40 trumpets. I'm going to draw a colon. You could also make this a fraction if you wanted to, but I like to use the colon when I'm doing ratios. So trumpets, there are 40. How many violins are there? There were 24. So our ratio is 40 trumpets to 24 violins. Now we can reduce that. If you can plug this in on your calculator as a fraction and hit enter and it will reduce it for you. If you do that, it's going to reduce it to 5/3. So let's look at number 2. They want to know flutes to clarinets. Looking back over here, there were 51 flutes and 39 clarinets. Now you need to go ahead and reduce that the same way you did number 1. That will reduce to 17 to 13. So you can just think of this like a fraction. So if you put in 51 over 39 on your calculator and press enter, it will reduce it to 17/13. All right, trombones to trumpets. That's going to be 16 trombones to 40 trumpets. We can also reduce that to 2 to 5. And violins to total instruments. There are 24 violins, and to get the total amount of instruments, we're going to have to look at all of the instruments and just add them together. So if I add them all together, I have 170 total instruments, which can also be reduced to 12 to 85. Now, what is an extended ratio? Well, it works just like a regular ratio, except it is a comparison of 3 or more quantities. And the way we write extended ratios, we can't really write that as a fraction because there's 3 numbers, so we're going to use the colons, and we're going to say A to B to C. All of those would be different numbers. All right, so to use ratios with triangles, we're going to use them to find angles and sides. So let's just jump in and look at an example, number 5. And they're telling us that the ratio of two complementary angles is 3 to 7. Find the measures of both angles. So the first thing we need to do is set up an equation. And the way that's going to work is I'm going to use my proportions 3 to 7 to set up the equation. So I know that I don't know the actual measures of the angles, so I'm going to have to use x for the value. So the measure of two complementary angles, the ratio of two complementary angles is 3 to 7. So I'm going to use 3x. Remember, complementary angles means that they add up to 90 degrees. So I'm going to add that to 7x. And we're going to set that equal to 90 because complementary means 90 degrees. So now that you have an equation, you can just plug that into InSolve on your calculator and figure out what x is. That's going to be your first step. So if I InSolve that, I'm going to get x is equal to 9. But that's not the final answer. The final answer wants us to find the measure of both angles. Well, the first angle is 3x, but I already know what x is. It's 9, so I'm just going to plug in 9 for x. And that's going to give me the measure of this first angle. 9 times 3 is 27 degrees. And if I want to know the measure of the next angle, that was 7x, so I'm going to plug in the value of x that we found for that as well. So that will be 7 times 9, which is 63 degrees. So the answer to this problem is one angle is 27 degrees, the other angle is 63 degrees. Alright, let's take a look at example number 6. And this time they tell us that the ratio of two supplementary angles is 4 to 1. Find the measure of both angles. So this looks like number 5, except we're using supplementary this time. And remember, supplementary means it's going to add up to 180 degrees. So let's look at our ratio, and let's set up our equation. 4x comes from this number, plus 1x comes from this number. And supplementary means they're going to add up to 180, so that's why I added these two quantities together, and I'm going to set them equal to 180. Plug that into InSolve, and you should get x is equal to 36. Then all you have to do is plug this 36 into both of these x's separately. So I'm going to say 4x is equal to, well, I already know what x is, so I'm going to write 4, and I'm going to replace x with 36, because that's what I found x to be. And 36 times 4 is 144. And then 1x, that's going to be, I'm just going to plug in the same x value for that. That's just going to be 1 times 36, which is just 36. So the answer to the problem is 144 degrees and 36 degrees. All right, let's look at problem number 7. The ratio of the measures of the angles in a triangle is 4, 7, 9. So 4 to 7 to 9. That's an extended ratio. Find the measures of the angles. So this time they're giving us all three angles. So we're going to follow the same process and set up an equation. We've got a 4x plus a 7x plus a 9x. Now what are we going to set that equal to? Well, they want to know the measures of the angles in a triangle. And we know there's three angles here, and what do all three angles add up to in a triangle? It's called the angle sum theorem. They add up to 180 degrees. So you're going to plug this equation into InSolve, and you're going to get x is equal to 9. And then I just got to take this 9 and plug it in for each one of these x's. So that's going to be 4 times 9, which is 36. 7 times 9, which is 63. And 9 times 9, which is 81. So the answer to this problem is 36 degrees, 63 degrees, and 81 degrees. Now if you wanted to check yourself, you can add these up and make sure they equal to 180. Alright, let's take a look at number 8. The ratio of the measures of the angles in a triangle is 11 to 2 to 5. Find the measure of the largest angle. Well, we're still going to set this up the same way that we did with all of the other problems, except we're just going to be finding something different. So let me go ahead and set up my equation. I'm going to take my 11, add an x, plus 2x plus 5x. And that's 3 angles. We know that 3 angles add up to 180 degrees. So I'm going to set that equal to 180 and solve for x in InSolve. And I get x to be 10. Now that's not the final answer. They want us to find the measure of the largest angle. So where do I need to plug this 10 in? Well, I know that my largest angle is going to be whichever expression has the largest coefficient, which is right here at 11x. So all I have to do is plug in my x value for 11x, solve that, and you get 110 degrees. And that is going to be your answer. Since they only want the largest angle, you don't have to plug the x into the other two. So let's flip over to the back. We've got 2 more. This time it says the ratio of the measures of the sides of a triangle. This time we're talking about sides and not angles. So we're going to need a little more information. But anyway, the ratio is 2 to 8 to 9. If the perimeter of the triangle is 76 inches, find the length of each side. Now you may need to remember that the perimeter of a figure is the sum of all sides. So that's going to help us set up this problem. So to set this problem up, I'm going to do it similar to the way I did the angles. So I'm going to look at my ratio. I've got a 2. Just going to put an x next to it, plus 8, put an x next to it, plus 9, and put an x next to it. Now we're talking about sides here, so I need to know what the perimeter is. If we add up all 3 sides of a triangle, it's going to equal the perimeter. They tell me that the perimeter of the triangle is 76 inches. So we're going to set that equal to 76. Put that in InSolve, solve for x, and you get 4. Alright, so they're asking us to find the length of each side. So I've got to take that x and plug it into each one of these side lengths. So I'm going to have 2 times 4. That comes from this side. I'm going to have 8 times 4, which comes from this side. And I'm going to have 9 times 4, which comes from that side. So just plug all these in on your calculator, and you're going to get 8, 32, and 36. Now since the perimeter is 76 inches, each one of these things are also going to be inches. So once you do that, you're done with this problem. So you guys go ahead and pause the video and try number 10. Alright, hopefully you were able to work through that. It says the ratio of the measures of the sides of a triangle is 10 to 15 to 6. If the perimeter of the triangle is 217 meters, find the length of the shortest side. So hopefully your equation looked something like this. And we're talking about sides, so we needed to know the perimeter. The perimeter was 217. So if you put that in InSolve, you should get x is equal to 7. But they want to know the length of the shortest side. The shortest side is going to be the term that has the smallest coefficient, which is 6. So I'm going to plug my x value into that, which is 6 times 7. And so my shortest side is going to be 42 meters. Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about today is a proportion. And you guys should have worked with proportions before, so this should not be new. But so we'll just do a quick review. What is a proportion? A proportion is just an equation that states 2 ratios are equal. That's all it is. So we're going to take 2 ratios, just like we learned in the previous section, and we're going to set them equal to each other. And the way we write a proportion is 2 fractions that are equal to each other. So 2 fractions that are equal to each other is a proportion. So I'm going to have some number over another number. We'll call those numbers A and B. And I'm going to set that equal to another number over another number. We'll call those C and D. And if you remember, the way we solve proportions is we cross multiply. So I'm going to multiply like this. So if I wanted to solve that, I'm going to have A times D is equal to B times C. All right, let's take a look at a couple of examples and see how we can do this. So number 11, I have 4 over x equals 2 over 7. So what I want to do is be able to solve for x. So all I need to do is cross multiply. I'm going to have 2x is equal to 7 times 4. All right. At this point, you can just plug that into InSolve and you will have your answer. But if I wanted to solve that manually, because this is an easy equation, I would just have 2x is equal to 7 times 4 is 28. And if I want to get x by itself, I need to divide by 2. 28 divided by 2 is 14. So x is equal to 14. In a proportion, once you get your x value, you're done. All right, I'm going to only do the odds on this side, and then I'm going to let you guys practice. So number 13 looks a little bit different, and you've got to be careful with this type of proportion because now we don't have x all by itself in the top of that proportion on number 13. We've got x minus 1 over 6 is equal to 13 over 9. I'm still going to cross multiply, except when I cross multiply 9 times the x minus 1, the 19 times x minus 1, I need to multiply the 19 by everything that's with the x. So the way we can write that down is 19 and then put x minus 1 in parentheses. Like that. And that's going to equal 6 times 13. Now you actually could type this into InSolve exactly the way it is and it will give you an answer. But if you want to solve it by hand, which I encourage you to do because you're going to need to know how to solve things by hand next year in Algebra 2. So if I want to do that, I need to distribute, remember the distributive property, the 19 into everything inside the parentheses. So that's going to be 19x minus 19 is equal to, well, what is 6 times 13? That is 78. Then I'm going to, since I've got 19x minus 19, I need to add 19 to both sides. And I'll have 19x is equal to 97. And finally, to get x by itself, I need to divide by 19 on both sides. And this is going to give you a decimal, and that's okay. Do 97 divided by 19, which is 5.1. All right, so let's do number 15 and 17, and then I may do one more. I may do 18 also, because that one looks a little bit different. But let's look at 15. I've got 10 over 2x minus 9 is equal to 20 over 9. I'm still going to cross multiply. I always like to start with the term that has the x value. So I'm going to start with 2x minus 9. And since the x is not by itself, I'm going to put that in parentheses, and I have to multiply that by 20. That means I have to multiply both things by 20. So I'm just going to throw that 20 out here in front of the parentheses. And we're going to set that equal to 10 times 9. Now again, you could type this into InSolve just like it is, and it should give you an answer. But I'm going to solve it by hand again. I'm going to distribute the 20. So 20 times 2x is 40x. 20 times negative 9 is negative 180. And 10 times 9 is 90. If I want to continue solving this, I'm going to add 180 to both sides. And I'll have 40x is equal to 270. And my last step is just to divide by 40. and I'll have x equals 6.75. And that's your final answer. That should be the same answer that you got if you plug that first line into nsolve on the calculator. Alright, so the last one I'm going to do is number 17. And it looks even more different than the other two, but we're going to solve it the same way. We're going to cross multiply. This time both sides have x's, so we need to be careful. I need to multiply 18 by x minus 20. So 18 is going to get multiplied by everything on the top of that fraction. So I'm going to write down 18 and then just put x minus 20 in parentheses is equal to 3 times x minus 11. Alright, I did this one in nsolve. I typed it in nsolve just like this, and I got x is equal to 21.8. So you're going to want your calculator to look like this. nsolve 18 x minus 20 is equal to 3 x minus 11 in parentheses, and you want your comma x, and you want to close your whole parentheses. So if you type this in nsolve, it should give you 21.8, which is the correct answer. Alright, so go ahead and this is the end of the video, so I want you guys to go ahead and practice. So the substitute will tell you what your next assignment is.